Right now, if your phone died in an unfamiliar part of your own city, there's a good chance you'd feel a small wave of panic. No map, no blue dot, no voice telling you where to turn. Just you, and a world that suddenly feels unreadable. But for most of human history, this exact situation, being far from home with no device to guide you, wasn't a crisis. It was simply Tuesday. Ancient humans routinely traveled hundreds of miles through unmarked wilderness, across deserts, oceans, and mountain ranges without a single sign, satellite, or GPS signal, and somehow they almost never got hopelessly lost. So, what did they know that we've completely forgotten? The first thing to understand is that ancient humans weren't navigating randomly, hoping to stumble onto something familiar. They were reading an enormous amount of environmental information that most modern humans have simply stopped noticing. The position of the sun throughout the day, the direction prevailing winds bent the trees, the way moss tended to grow more heavily on one side of certain rocks, the behavior of animals, since many species travel toward water sources at predictable times. None of this information was hidden. It was everywhere, all the time. The difference is that ancient humans were trained, from early childhood, to actually pay attention to it, while modern humans have almost no reason to. Nowhere is this more dramatic than in the Pacific. Polynesian navigators regularly sailed thousands of miles across open ocean, between islands separated by nothing but empty horizon in every direction, centuries before modern instruments existed. They didn't have compasses. They had something arguably more sophisticated, and it lived entirely inside their minds. Navigators memorized what's now called a star compass, tracking the exact points on the horizon where specific stars rose and set throughout the year. At night, the sky itself became a rotating map. During the day, they read the ocean itself, distinguishing subtle patterns in swells that bounced off distant islands long before land was visible, sometimes detecting an island's presence from over 30 miles away, just from the way the water moved differently beneath their canoe. This wasn't guesswork. It was a navigation system passed down orally across generations, refined over thousands of voyages, precise enough to intentionally locate islands smaller than a few miles wide, scattered across an ocean, covering a third of the planet. Land-based hunter-gatherers developed their own version of the same skill, built around something researchers call cognitive mapping. Anthropologists studying groups like the Sand People of the Kalahari Desert and indigenous Australian communities have found that these groups maintain extraordinarily detailed mental maps of enormous territories, often spanning hundreds of square miles, built from memory alone. Every rock formation, waterhole, and unusual tree became a landmark tied to a specific story or song, which made the information nearly impossible to forget. In Aboriginal Australian cultures, this took the form of songlines, oral maps encoded into songs, where traveling the correct route meant literally singing the correct sequence of verses, each one corresponding to a specific landmark along an ancient path. Getting lost wasn't really possible. If the entire route lived inside a song you'd known since childhood. This raises an important question. If natural navigation was this powerful, why did humans ever give it up? The answer isn't that these skills stopped working. It's that they slowly stopped being necessary. As societies grew larger and more settled, physical infrastructure began doing the navigational work that memory once handled. Roads created fixed paths that didn't require reading the landscape. Street signs, addresses, and maps externalized information that used to live entirely inside a person's head. Each new tool was undeniably useful, but each one also quietly reduced the pressure on the brain to develop and maintain these older navigational skills. Then GPS arrived, and the shift became almost total. Researchers studying brain activity have found that heavy reliance on turn by turn navigation apps appears to reduce activation in the hippocampus, the brain region closely tied to spatial memory, and notably, also linked to broader memory formation. In other words, we didn't just lose the ability to navigate without help. We may have partially disengaged an entire category of memory related brain function that our ancestors used constantly. Some researchers describe this as a kind of use it or lose it relationship between environment and cognition. Ancient humans weren't necessarily born with better brains than ours. They were born into an environment that demanded constant spatial awareness, and their brains developed accordingly. The same way physical exercise shapes the body over time, modern humans are born with the exact same underlying neurological capacity, but we rarely exercise it because the environment no longer requires it. The skill hasn't disappeared from human biology, it's simply gone dormant in a world engineered to make it optional. There's something worth sitting with here. For hundreds of thousands of years, the ability to navigate wasn't a hobby or a survival skill reserved for explorers. It was baseline human competence, something every single person needed to move safely through the world. Losing it wasn't a personal failure. It was simply the natural result of building a civilization that no longer required it. So the next time your phone battery dies and that small flicker of panic sets in, it's worth remembering that your ancestors crossed entire oceans using nothing but stars, water, and memory. And they weren't unusually gifted for doing it. They were simply using a version of the brain you already have, just one the modern world rarely asks you to switch on.